So, getting the smaller stuff out of the way, Time magazine has granted God of War Ragnarok its prestigious Game of the Year award ahead of the actual Game Awards event hosted by Jeff Keighley this December. Interestingly, Elden Ring, widely tipped to win Game of the Year across the board, came in fourth. And PlayStation 5 is closing in on 9 million units ahead of Xbox Series X and S. PS5 currently sits at 26.6 million consoles shipped, and Xbox Series X and S equal 18.6 million. Sony may have solved its PS5 manufacturing issues, as the gap has grown from 4.7 million units back in June in just 6 months, considering PS5's price hike, $70 games, and a lack of availability. This achievement is remarkable. Certainly respectable numbers for Xbox as well. And speaking of Xbox, Game Pass is likely to hit 35 to 40 million active subscribers by financial year 2024. Game Pass currently at a respectable 29 million users, and that's according to Sony spies or moles, and with the expected influx of AAA Xbox Game Studio game releases and third-party partners throughout 2023, this may indeed give Sony's PS5 its biggest run for its money yet. Interesting times ahead. And Sony's premier racer Gran Turismo 7 is likely to be the next PlayStation to PC port. It's highly probable Gran Turismo 7 on PC will feature full ray tracing during races and replays for higher-end gaming rigs, which is nice. There'll be more news on that as it becomes available. And there you have it. Those are your bite-sized news stories just ahead of our main news items. So apparently, Sony quietly cancelled a planned PlayStation showcase for 2022, and it's all because of the ongoing Xbox Activision Blizzard King scrutiny of the deal, where both Sony and Microsoft are playing the victim card. Microsoft is happy to royally defecate on its own brand and is displaying classic self-deprecation, completely overblown, just to get the deal over the line. In fact, Team Green is so desperate to get the deal done, it is literally spending lots of money and bending over backwards for Sony, largely revolving around the Call of Duty franchise just to appease regulators. This tells me Microsoft are not as confident about the Activision Blizzard King deal as its CEO Satya Nadella intimated several weeks ago. Meanwhile, Serbia has followed Saudi Arabia and Brazil, granting unconditional approval for Xbox to acquire Activision Blizzard King, which ultimately leaves 13 global regulators out of 16 still undecided on the acquisition. However, the FTC, that's Federal Trade Commission, has threatened a lawsuit against Microsoft in order to stop the deal, and the UK's CMA, that's Commission for Mergers and Acquisitions, don't seem to be on board with the acquisition either. It is my understanding that even if every other regulator approves this deal, it could still fall through if the FTC and CMA continue to oppose it. Certainly a lot to play for here. Though there's a strange dichotomy and sense of irony that Activision itself does not see value in Game Pass, that is, including its own games into the service, believing game subscription services including day-and-date game releases devalue, cannibalize game sales. And this in spite of the Xbox Activision Blizzard acquisition plans. Source via the delightfully named tweaktown.com and VGC, that's videogameschronicle.com. All relevant links can be found in this video's description. Here's the full story. So it looks like the Microsoft merger is the only chance for Activision games to come to the Game Pass subscription service. Activision apparently has no intention of making its own game subscription or bringing its games to Game Pass or PlayStation Plus if the merger fails. So Activision Blizzard games will not appear on any subscription services if the merger with Microsoft does not go through. In a recent 111-page response letter to UK regulators, Microsoft reveals some rather interesting details about Activision's thoughts on subscriptions. According to Microsoft, who cites internal data and sworn testimony from executives, Activision has no plans to bring its big mainline games to a subscription service if the merger is not approved. This is particularly interesting because of the pre-existing deal that Activision made with Sony some time ago. Activision had signed a big multi-year marketing and licensing deal with Sony that offered exclusive content to PlayStation. Part of that contract stipulated that Activision could not release Call of Duty on Game Pass. According to Microsoft's recent statements to the CMA, Activision had no plans to release Call of Duty or any of its big games to Game Pass regardless. Here's a quote from page 5. Activision has never published any newer content on multi-game subscription services and has no intention to do so in the future. Without the merger, Activision content would not be available on multi-game subscription services. The merger can therefore not make competitive conditions worse under any circumstances. Activision does not make its games, including Call of Duty, available in any meaningful sense to any multi-game subscription services, nor is there any evidence that this is likely to change in the foreseeable future. And so Activision's ordinary course internal business documents, as well as the sworn testimony of its executives, has made clear there are no plans to do so in the future absent of a merger. Activision is concerned that participation in subscription services could impact it, and this has been redacted, would lead to brand dilution and cannibalization of buy-to-play games, especially new releases. This reflects Activision's view that even if subscription business models were to grow, the, again redacted, this has been a fundamental impediment to publishers more generally agreeing to place their content on subscription services, a stance which is not going to change in the future. Wow. So Activision, who is due to be purchased or trying to be purchased by Microsoft, do not agree in putting games on subscription services day and date because they believe that this is an impediment to publishers. In other words, this does not work in the publisher's favor. This is not beneficial to the publisher. Interesting, and there's been other publishers that have spoken for Xbox saying that it has worked for them. Very interesting indeed. So I'm always going to put both sides of the argument across. It doesn't matter what my preferred platform or system or style of game is, genre of games. I'm always going to try and be fair and impartial as I can and give both sides. But the reason is pretty clear. Day-and-date releases of Call of Duty would dramatically affect full game sales. Even older catalog games still sell incredibly well, and for instance, the franchise sold 25 million copies of various games during 2021, which has seen a down year due to Vanguard's performance. Call of Duty is so powerful because it takes advantage of both game sales, that's full game sales, and in-game purchases via microtransactions. Disrupting full game sales would significantly affect Call of Duty's earnings. For reference, Modern Warfare 2 made over $1 billion in 10 days solely from full game sales across platforms. This is the reason why Take-Two Interactive will not release games day one into Game Pass, and why it only supports Game Pass on a very selective and limited basis. This also seems to confirm that Activision was not working on its own multi-game subscription services comparable to EA Play or Ubisoft Plus. And that is a relief, because the more subscription services we have, that in itself cannibalizes the entire industry. Imagine they were all providing you game services. You'd have to literally sign up. If you were a fan of those games, you had a desire to play those games, you'd have to sign up to individual publishers. That would be ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So there you have it, folks. It's all there, plain to see. Activision do not wish to place its games onto Game Pass day and date, unless, of course, the merger goes through, in which case Microsoft would fully own the publisher and they'd have no choice. But it shows you their stance on Game Pass and how they believe it devalues their games and is an impediment to publishers. It's a negative, not a positive. As I say, the irony of such a statement is not lost on me. However, moving on to Video Games Chronicle, VGC.com, Microsoft is likely to offer concessions soon to help gain EU approval for Activision's deal with Microsoft, including a 10-year licensing deal to Sony for Call of Duty to remain on PlayStation. Now, we've heard drips and drops of this already, but there's more information coming out, new information, sort of cements the whole idea of what we've heard before. Microsoft is reportedly expected to offer concessions to EU regulators soon in a bid to help push for its proposed Activision Blizzard acquisition. This is showing Microsoft's desperation. I've said this before in many other videos, that Microsoft is going to be willing to do absolutely anything to get this deal over. That's according to Reuters sources, who said Microsoft's sweeteners would consist mainly of a 10-year licensing deal to PlayStation maker Sony. The future of the Call of Duty series as a multi-platform product is one of the key areas being examined by antitrust regulators scrutinizing Microsoft's proposed $68.7 billion acquisition of Activision. And recently Microsoft said it had offered Sony a deal that would see the Call of Duty franchise remain on PlayStation for a decade. Here's a quote. Sony, as the industry leader, says it's worried about Call of Duty, but we've said we are committed to making the game available on the same day on both Xbox and PlayStation, a Microsoft spokesperson told Reuters, who want people to have more access to games, not less. But in all fairness, even if Microsoft followed through, that's a very vague statement. I mean, they could offer exclusives over the PlayStation. They could offer Game Pass over the PlayStation at some point, and then that will kind of nullify it even being released on the platform, because nobody wants to pay for something that's available or accessible for damn near free somewhere else. However, such is Microsoft's desire to get this deal going. The European Commission officially launched an in-depth probe of Microsoft's proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard in November, and the Commission is concerned that the proposed acquisition may reduce competition in the markets for distribution of console and personal computers. That's, old-fashioned way of saying PCs, and video games, and for PC operating systems. And the EU competition watchdog is due to rule on the deal by April 11, 2023. Of many regulators reviewing the deal, only Saudi Arabia and Brazil and Serbia have approved so far, although Microsoft reportedly expects other countries to follow through. So they're relying on 13 more global regulators. It's a real hill to get this over the line, isn't it? Now, in statements recently provided to the UK's competitive watchdog, Sony claimed that if Microsoft was to gain sole control of Activision's irreplaceable content, it could lead the company increasing its Xbox hardware, software, and subscription prices, something that Sony has actually done. So it's a bit of a, double speak there. Sony being a bit two-faced, hypocritical. Did they not just increase the PlayStation 5's hardware? Have not games been increased to $70? Is this not what they are accusing Microsoft of potentially doing should the Activision deal go through? I mean, you don't have to be an intelligent Einstein, if you like, to see there's a problem in that. Now, Sony also claimed that Microsoft's true strategy, this is something I've already covered in a prior video, Microsoft's true strategy behind the Activision Blizzard deal is to have PlayStation become like Nintendo and not compete in the 18-rated shooter space. And Microsoft responded with, well, Nintendo Switch has more 18-plus adult-rated games than on Xbox, which is really hard to believe. It's probably true because there's a whole bunch of shovelware on there that could be defined as 18-plus, but there you go. We are indeed living in extraordinary times. But how do you feel about both Microsoft and Sony playing victim for the remaining 13 global regulator bodies, meaning we may not get some of the bigger unannounced game reveals at the Game Awards 2022 next month, and indeed the rumored cancellation of a PlayStation event due to take place at the tail end of this year? Could it be that Sony will do something at E3 next year after a quiet, prolonged absence? Or do you think Sony Interactive Entertainment is done with the ESA? All that, Game Pass, Sony sells, Microsoft sells, and more. What say you? Let's continue the discussion cordially in the comments. Go ahead, sound off, share your thoughts and opinion on today's news, as that brings us to the end of the video. But subscribe for more gaming news, rumor, speculation, and of course, my opinion. Hit that like button, yes. Hit the notification bell so we don't miss each other. And you can help Foxy Games UK reach more gamers, so please feel free to share the video. You may also wish to consider supporting Foxy Games UK via Patreon, because, well, we're like family now. So thank you, and you can find a link in this video's description. That concludes our time together today. Thanks for hanging out with me. Until next time, play games, not corporations.